Welcome back. It's good to see you again. I've been thinking once again about another C.S. Lewis quotation. It's from an essay of his on three ways of writing for children. The quotation is this: "Since it is so likely that they will meet cruel enemies, let them at least have heard of brave knights and heroic courage. Otherwise, we make their destinies not brighter, but darker." And of course, he's interacting with the idea of why would we expose children to fighting and war and battles and the slaying of dragons and other beasts or slaying of enemies when we could expose them to the peaceful side in society when there is no war and all that sort of thing. And his point is an obvious one, which is there are cruel enemies of various kinds. Sometimes it's an actual enemy in front of you, another moral agent, and sometimes it's a situation or some other such thing. That has formed one of the main principles I have about what books we have in the house and what books I read my children. There are some books that are in our possession that I've refused to read our children, and it's really just in lieu of perhaps getting rid of the book altogether. But I've refused to read them because they don't interest me. And we do this weird thing with children when we read them stories. For most of our ancestors' history, the stories you got told as a child were stories that also all of the adults would listen to as well. And it was something that the adults in a society or in a home would tell each other. They would tell each other these stories in a narrative form or in a poetic form or what have you. And the children in that society, in that family, would be invited into the experience, and it elevates them as well as condescends. It helps the adults in the society condescend to the children as well. It also helps put boundaries on the sort of stories that you tell as well, that there's some level of propriety that has to be guarded. But like I said, the principle that I operate off of is if it's not of interest to me, I don't read it. Because again, we do this weird thing with children where we kind of pander to them. So many, you get those board books from, really anywhere, and it's maybe about stars and planets. And it starts out with this lame rhyme, and it says something to the effect of, stars are big balls of gas, millions and millions of miles away, and what have you. And I think to a child, the artwork sometimes might be interesting. The content of the story is uninteresting. It's uninteresting for an adult to hear, well, a star is just a big ball of gas, isn't it? And actually, C.S. Lewis talks about that in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, that's what a star is made of. That's not what a star is. Anyway, we do this pandering ritual with children and then wonder why they hate reading as they continue to grow older, or if they read really uninteresting, dumb works of literature. They have a hard time grasping, understanding, and enjoying classics, or even just old stories, old poems, that sort of thing. And it's no wonder, because all we've done is inculcate in them that books are boring and drab and most of the time have ugly illustrations and artwork in them. They're made out of paper or cardboard that just fall apart and disintegrate. So we've taken the entire exercise of reading and listening to stories and entertaining and exercising your imagination, even about real things. So again, it's not unimaginative to conceive of, it's not unscientific to conceive of a star as something more than just a big ball of gas. That isn't unscientific. It requires imagination and an exercise thereof. Anyway, I have been thinking about that quotation, and I have really enjoyed one of my newer acquisitions, which I've shown you before. This is Britain long ago. This is a book I got from my father for Christmas in 2024. This is the one I had to have sent off to a bookbinder to repair it, and he did a fantastic job. But I've enjoyed reading almost all of these stories. I don't think we've read all of them, but I've enjoyed reading all of these old British stories to my children. And even if maybe they don't understand it or they don't like it initially, they always come around, and it ends up, the way I know that is it sticks in their imagination because it comes out later in conversations when we're playing or when we're just talking. And so I know that even if they don't understand fully, they're catching some of the imagery, catching even some of the words. I've heard my 3-year-old utter some big words recently that I think he only heard from this book. So, in the interest of reading a story that I like, that an adult could enjoy, as well as something that would be salubrious for a child to hear as well, I thought I might just read one of these to you. Some of these stories are longer, but like in this case, this one is 3 pages, almost 4. So they're very short, they're very succinct, and they're written, of course, very well. This one here is the story of the fight of Britnoth. And I had heard of this, but I didn't know any details, so it was also kind of educational for me to hear the rough summary of the story. So I thought I might just read this to you because this shouldn't take very long. So I hope you're sitting down and relaxing. I'm drinking coffee right now, but maybe you have something stronger that might help you enjoy this a little bit more. But this is the story of the fight at Britnoth. This is a story, first told in verse, of a fight between the Northmen and the English followers of Britnoth, a noble leader of the West Saxons, at Malden in Essex. The Northmen, or Vikings as they are often called, had entered Essex, and sailing up the river Blackwater had pitched their camp upon the banks, and were greatly troubling the land. When Britnoth knew this, he determined to do his utmost to drive the Northmen from the land, so he made ready his young warriors, and told each how he was to stand, and how to hold his round shield fast, and be affrighted at nothing. Then, with a band of his own special retainers, he went down to the river's brink. On the other side of the river stood the herald of the Vikings, and this was the message he brought to Britnoth. The swift men of the sea have sent me to tell you this. You may buy your safety with money and golden bracelets, but let it be bought quickly. If you give us these at once, we need not fight and slay you all, but instead will make a peace with you because of your gold, and will sail away in our ships. Then Britnoth's mighty breast heaved with anger, and he shook his ash stick at the herald and made answer in these brave words. Hear thou, seafarer, what my people say to thee. They will buy their safety with spears, with sharp points and well-tried swords. Tell your masters that an earl with his army stands here to defend his own dear land against the enemy. Shame is it that you should sail away with our gold, and that we should never strike a blow. There shall be hard fighting before we sell our lives. Then Britnoth bade his men march down to the water's brink to meet the enemy. But before they could do this, the tide came up, for the Blackwater was a tidal river and prevented them. So they stood on either side, the throng of the East Saxons on one brink and the Northmen on the other, and none of them could reach the enemy except those who could reach them with their arrows. At last the tide went out, and the foemen pressed near very eager for the fight. Then Wulfstan, a brave young warrior, flung his javelin at the foremost man, and stepping onto the narrow bridge, with 2 of his companions, kept it against the foe. When the Northmen found that they could not displace them, they began to try to get the better of them by deceit, and asked if they might have leave to bring their troops over the water to the opposite side. Then Britnoth, being in high spirits, gave them leave to do so, saying, Come straightway over to us, for God alone knows who shall win this battle. So the Vikings splashed through the water, for which they cared nothing, and found the host of Britnoth drawn up with their shields close, so as to form a wall. Then the combat began, and very fiercely they fought on both sides, while javelins were flung, bows were busy, and the watchful ravens circled overhead. At last, after he had killed many of the foemen, a dart flung by one of the enemy pierced Britnoth himself. A young boy named Wulfmer, who was standing by him, snatched out the spear and flung it back again, but Britnoth sank to the ground exhausted. Then came up a wily fighting man to take from him his bracelets, his rings, and his robe as a sign of having conquered him. But the old chieftain snatched out his sword, all stained with blood, and smote him on the breast, and so slew him. Then the weapons fell from Britnoth's hands, and his strength went from him. So he called to his companions, and bade the youths fight bravely on, though he could not stand up with them any longer. And he thanked God for all his long and happy life, and so gave up his brave soul and died. And Wolfmar was killed at his side. Then a panic seized some of his followers, and one named Godric fled from the field, and jumping on the back of the horse which stood waiting for Earl Britnoth, rode off with his 2 brothers to the shelter of the woods. And many others, when they saw their flight, forgot their duty to their good lord Britnoth, and also ran away. But the young men, who were his closest friends and followers, drew together, determined either to die or to avenge their lord, and one of them, named Alfwin, a very young warrior, cheered them, saying, "How many times have we heard bold speeches round the fireside as we sat in comfort at home? Now is the chance to show who is bold indeed, not only in word. For my part, I come of noble kinsmen, and it shall never be said of me that I left the battlefield and sought my home for safety, while my brave lord lay dead upon the battlefield." Then another, named Offa, spoke up and said, "We ought to fight, all the better because Godric has so basely betrayed us. For many of our host, seeing Britnoth's horse galloping away, thought it was our dear lord who fled from the field." Then all agreed that they would not think of flight, but would wipe out the disgrace that Godric had brought upon them and avenge the death of their lord. So the battle raged again, for a brave man fell, and amongst them that bold seaman Offa, who had pledged his lord either to ride back home with him unhurt, or to die in battle. Yet still the rest fought on, cheering their comrades with brave words, such as those of Britwald, an old soldier, who cried out, "The mind shall be harder, the heart shall be keener, and the courage shall be bolder as our strength grows less. An old man am I, yet from hence will I not stir, but am hoping to lie by the side of my well-loved lord." So most of those brave men died that day, and the Northmen won a great battle. But so hard had been the fighting that they could not help respecting their foes, who had preferred to fight till they were all killed rather than pay money for their safety and their lives. I like that one. I think my boys liked it too. All that to say, especially if you had children, don't read them dumb books. Don't read them boring books, especially boys. Read them stories about, again, brave knights and heroic virtue. My mother was reading some of the kids a book today, and it was talking about a dad and a child in the forest owl hunting, I think. And my one son just perked up and said, "Oh, in the woods?" And he went around and asked several of his cousins if they would like a sword when they go to the woods so that they can help him fight and kill a dragon. And I thought that was really funny. I'm apparently reading him interesting stories, or at least those about forests, swords, and dragons. So I hope you enjoyed that. It was good to see you again. I'll see you next time. Until then.